and Dissertation Association webinar, Digitizing Dissertations and Theses in-house, Planning and Implementation. Mark Iacovakis, a board member of Texas ETDA, or what we call TEXIDA, and our host for today's webinar. Our speaker today is Joy Perrin. Start by giving some general information about our organization. The vision of the Texas ETD Association is to be a leader in the field of electronic theses and dissertations within the state of Texas and serve as a model for statewide ETD associations throughout the nation. We started in 2009 and is free and open for anyone to join, even if you live outside of Texas. And you can mainly by subscribing to our listserv, and the list is here in the slide, which will be sent out after the webinar. The listserv keeps abreast of current information, including upcoming events, and encourages dialogue between members and institutions regarding issues of interest to ETD professionals. Logistics before we get started. All attendees are muted to prevent background noise. In the Q&A session, we're going to leave about 10 minutes, and it will be held after the presenter has spoken. But enter questions at any time. You'll see there are two different boxes. There's a Q&A box and a chat box. To ask a question, please click on the Q&A button. It's in the upper right of the screen. And remember that the setting is on all panelists, please. So go ahead and change that drop-down menu. There's also a chat function, and you can use that for just general comments. Is being recorded, and all participants will receive an email with links to the recording and presentation slides. To our speaker now. Joy Perrin is the Digital Initiatives Librarian at the Texas Tech University Libraries. Ms. has 10 years experience with digital projects and is the author of the 2015 book, Digitizing Flat Media, Principles and Practices. And with that, here's Joy.
Thank you. Today we're going to talk about digitizing theses and dissertations in-house. So first of all, who am I? Clark did a great job as introduction, but I needed to have the obligatory ORCID ID. I've been involved with digital collections since 2007. My project, the one that I cut my teeth on, was our thesis and dissertation learning project, thesis and dissertation digitization project, which was always hard to say. Since gained a lot of experience that I hope you can benefit from today. Because of that experience, I wrote a book. A lot of the presentation is going to be from the book, just geared toward theses and dissertation scanning. Either this presentation will save you $42, or it'll be a great advertisement for the book. So first, we're going to digitization process, what affects time to complete metadata. We'll talk about the specifics of different scanners, project planning for theses and dissertation projects, and general digital collection maintenance. And then we're going to talk about talking to administration about digital collection projects. But first, I want to talk about the good and the bad and the ugly of doing digitization in-house. The good. Scanning theses and dissertations can be one of the easiest digitization projects possible. They are fairly similar and in pretty good condition. You usually know how many you have. They were guided by some kind of publishing rules, so there's less variety. And done can be one of the most rewarding projects to take on because you're publishing someone's seminal work. The project that I worked on was my most rewarding and impactful projects. So doing in-house digitization supports local workers instead of sending the money to an outsourcing company. At least in one case, one of my student assistants used his experience in my lab to become a digital lab manager himself, which gave him a career path he had never considered. The bad. Doing the work in-house is sometimes cheaper than outsourcing, but it is not free and it might not be easy. It will take in resources. There's no getting around the fact that it takes effort to get things up, and you will mess up and have to redo some work. That's just the nature of the beast. Try to flip quickly. The ugly. For I had to manage a room full of part-time workers and machines that were always breaking, while constantly tweaking a workflow that was deeply broken when I inherited it. It was my learning curve, but the learning curve of every student that started in the lab. My number one priority was training, and then training, and quality control and review, and think faster ways of doing everything. Despite all the effort, there were whole weeks that we were down because of regularly scheduled server maintenance, or both scanners were out of commission. Murphy's Law is that whatever can go wrong will. The more people you have more working and the more things you're trying to do, higher the chance that things will go wrong. So the point of doing digitization in-house is that you have to deal with all aspects of the project, both the good and the ugly, and the stuff you planned for and the stuff that you didn't. So next we'll talk about what digitization is like. I'm going to give you an example workflow and then talk about variations on that workflow. This in Moving Theory into Practice digital imaging tutorial from Cornell is a great training for staff involved in digitization. I highly recommend you go through this tutorial because it will go over parts of digital files in more depth. So before you start digitizing, decide how you will organize the physical items. Are you doing new items first or the oldest first? Will you go with the items in batches, and how big will those batches be? Are you going to have someone mark the items as being checked out or shelf somehow in the catalog? And what are you going to do with the items once you're finished scanning? Also, before you need to figure out a file management system that works for your setup. What we scan into a digital working space. Once the item is done, the files are moved to a waiting for quality review folder. If those items pass quality review, they are moved to a waiting for metadata folder. Once the item is uploaded and metadata is added, we delete working files and move the item to a dark archive. But you do it differently. The point is you need to have the system and keep it consistent. It's also important to have a naming schema for the images when you start out. You try to distinguish organizations, projects, items, and images within those items. Here's an example of what we do with our files so that if an image gets misplaced, we know exactly where it belongs. You don't have to do it this way, but we've had images that accidentally dragged and dropped folders of images into the wrong location, and because of this naming system, we were able to find them and move them back to their rightful folder. So now to step one, scanning. The book is retrieved by someone and brought to the scanner. The person scanning flips through the book to see if there's anything weird they need to address. Sometimes the books are in bad condition or there are foldouts. They make sure the scanner and computer are ready. They check scanner settings, next the right folder. They're scanning the book page by page, making sure to keep the images as flat as possible with a bound book, depending on the scanner and the book. This can take anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour and a half. So in general, these were the conditions of our theses and dissertations. There were plenty that didn't meet this criteria, and it was these variations that provided the most challenge. Despite the rows and rows of similarly looking ETDs, we found a surprising amount of variability in the way the items were displayed. Some were more artistic. Like I said, some had foldouts. Some, like these, were oversized. We had a different scanner to scan the oversized items. We could have outsourced these items, and we wouldn't have had to purchase a new scanner. So keep in mind that you might still have to outsource some of the scanning. I hate carbon copy paper. The VAR scanning was from 1926 to 2004. During that time, we went from typing out everything by hand to using carbon copy paper to dot matrix printers, and finally to just printing everything out on a desktop printer. Each replication requires its own processing. For the clear-cut prints, we could stay in grayscale and convert to black and white. For the blurry ones on carbon copy paper, we had to scan those in color. This period kind of needs to be treated a little differently. We had trained students by giving them a simple goal to make the text readable. If it needs in color, then let it be in color. If the option to cut the books. People kind of freak out about cutting books, but theoretically these items will live online, so they don't need to be there physically. Cutting and using a sheet feeder is probably one of the fastest, most accurate ways to scan books. You can get a really great sheet feeder for about $5,000. That'll scan 100 pages per minute. Keep in mind that not all books will go through a sheet feeder, and so you'll have to plan for alternative digitization for some items. If you plan cutting, plan on making a page-by-page review of each book part of the process so you don't accidentally cut a foldout in half or permanently damage a graphic. Also problematic are sometimes there are supplemental files like maps, CDs, tapes, floppy disks, and slides. We test these on a case-by-case basis. If you had a CD, we opened it to see if we could copy the files and include that in the completed material. We had to outsource the digitization of the tapes, and we had to buy a special slide scanner for all the slides we had for the architecture theses. Try to get a sense of how many supplemental files you have and plan accordingly. Some people choose not to include supplemental files at all. Step is image processing. You can go overboard with image processing. I have met people who are instinctively drawn to erase every random stray dot they see on the page. They eat up 3 to 6 hours of time on just one book. I recommend cropping the page and editing the color to make the text easier to read. Train yourself and part-time workers to focus on readability. The processing opens up the image in Photoshop, the crop box, change the text to as close to black and white as possible, and it's a batch process to run all the images in the folder. Depending on batch and your computer and the images to process, this could take 15 to 20 minutes. Doing hand on each image, however, could take a couple of hours. Almost any image editing software to process images for digitization, as long as the software can convert images, crop, and edit the colors, then you can use it. Scanners come with their own software that may meet your needs. You even have software that crops and edits colors as you scan. Double check that before you push new software. You would find software that could work in batches. Photoshop is great, but it's expensive and there's a learning curve. GIMP is a source image editing software and it would also work. Some people use ImageMagick, which has a programmatic interface that you can use. You will focus on how automatable the software is. Behind getting software that will do batches or process the images as you scan them is that you want to reduce hands-on time. Hands is the time to pay someone to touch a digital item. It's cheaper to have a computer batch process millions of images than it is to have a human do it. The more you have, the more batch processing you should be using. In the book, I talk about an example. It's possible to never have a person touch the image until it produces a PDF using some softwares. Getting as close to this ideal as possible will ultimately save you time and money. After processing comes OCR. That stands for optical character recognition. It's the way that the image of text converts into an editable and searchable text. It's only 80 to 90% effective, and that means that 80 to 90% of the characters will be correct, which means many of the words will not be correct and not be searchable. The more context the page has, the more accurate the OCR will be. If you want the OCR to be perfect, there is software you can purchase that will have staff edit the OCR, but it takes an incredible amount of time to do that. Adobe Acrobat Pro has an OCR engine built in. There's also more enterprise solutions like Abby Fine Reader. This step could take 15 minutes to convert those images into a PDF using Adobe Acrobat Pro. But this is often hands-off time, so you can have a worker create metadata while this batches. Step 4 is quality review. After the item is fully scanned, cleaned up, and OCR'd, now's the time to look things over to double-check to see if the item is truly finished. I like to follow the rules that the first week you want to check 100% of the workers' work. After that, for 2 months, check 10%, and after that, just keep checking 1% of their work. Quality review failing is a teachable moment, and don't try to fix the error yourself, even if it's faster to do so, because in the run, you want to train the employee to do better. Next, upload the item to a content management system or institutional repository and add metadata. If your process for metadata is more automated, then this step can be done by a program and not a person. The more you have, the more you can automate, the better. Now, I'm not a metadata librarian, and data is one of those topics that there's a lot of resources out there, so I'm going to talk about the practical aspects of metadata for theses and dissertations. And from a practical perspective, I'm only concerned about how fast metadata can happen. And I have aspects that affect how fast it goes, which is the system. Different management systems are capable of different things. This may affect how fast metadata can be entered. It requires you to take a minute to enter each metadata element, then doing 50,000 books with 13 bits of metadata will take a long time. However, if the system provides batch metadata, then you can speed the process up quite a bit and get 50,000 books done in very little time. So the more you have and the more metadata elements you have, the more system affects your metadata time. Next, the schema. Some schemas are more involved than others. The more points of data you are recording, the longer metadata will take. The points, the faster. A short record could take only 2 minutes. A longer, more detailed record could take up to an hour. Keep needs in mind and try not to future-proof your records. It's extremely easy to go through and fix 50,000 records if you're only fixing 1 bit at a time. I highly recommend looking at the new Texas Digital Library metadata guidelines for ETDs. It's at least a great place to start if you're looking at metadata schemas. Next thing that affects metadata speed is the items themselves, but because theses and dissertations are books, metadata is usually easier, even if it's entered by hand. However, if they are in a different language or if the title page is unreadable, it could lengthen the metadata processing time. Metadata can be easily done by part-time workers. But more complex metadata needs to be done by someone who's more familiar with the subject matter. Assume that each person doing metadata will take about 30 to 40 hours of work to become proficient. Try to include this in your predictions for time. Lastly, the workflow can have a big effect on metadata creation. In my example, the metadata came last, but in some projects, the metadata has to come first. If metadata creation is not automated, then this is an active hands-on task, and you consider pairing it with image batching or OCR, since those are passive tasks. So your items are already cataloged, then you can automate some metadata using a program. You can also decide if you're going to link the finished item to the MARC record. I suggest you don't do this unless you have permanent URLs or handles for each item. Automating the metadata. Cataloging means you can copy and paste some of the metadata elements, speeding up the process. You have to train students in how to find the original cataloging. Because cataloging information metadata often has different input rules, repurposing cataloging is not going to be 100% automated, but at least it will be faster than original cataloging. A fun thing about digitization projects is that when you use pre-existing metadata, it will uncover cataloging problems. At our organization, we had a shift in policy where we used to call copy 1 volume 1 and copy 2 volume 2. When we were digitizing, we thought we were scanning 2 volumes in work, but really we were just scanning the same volume twice. It led to a lot of duplicates. We also had a small set of theses and dissertations that were on the shelf, but for some reason were not cataloged. So for us, those had to go through cataloging first before they could be scanned. We found some theses and dissertations that were incorrectly cataloged, so that they had the wrong title and wrong author associated with the barcode. We are still finding some of those today. 6 is after the item is online. It's good to have a metadata quality review process. It's good to check 100% at first, and then drop to 10%, and then % for every person entering metadata. Even with automatically generated metadata, the process is not perfect. You will metadata quality control or quality review process. And yes, the item is online. There are hundreds of variations on this workflow. With just setup, I estimated at one point that we had 410 different variations in our process, and those variations were faster than others. This is why it's important to always experiment with your workflow to see if you can save time by changing up the process. But it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop when the item is online. Regardless of if you outsource or do digitization in-house, you will have ongoing maintenance. Now, many did get permission from authors change their minds or their kids change their minds. At that point, metadata requirements change, and you will probably have to update your metadata or convert to a new schema. We find errors in our project, and so you'll need a process for dealing with errors after the collection is done. We also have to occasionally deal with cease and desist orders from people who are not the authors. They cover our theses and dissertations looking for material that the authors didn't do their due diligence in finding copyright owners. Usually, we end up contacting the author and end up redacting 2 or 3 pages with a note. You will need to pay attention to digital preservation to make sure the files you created last longer than you do. And you may do usage assessment for the collection or impact assessment. You may also address items that you found were missing. We were lucky because we had an archive with most of our missing items in it. So this is a representation of where our digital files online and off for our thesis dissertations were as of 2012. The purple circle was our archive space, and I can see some of our files weren't in it, and some of them are online in an old system and not in the archive or on DSpace. Not everyone's situation is going to be this bad, but it shows a point that if you don't keep track of where things are, it can quickly get out of hand, especially when mixing DTDs, scanned theses and dissertations, and different systems. You will need to track what items you're working on and where those items are in the process. We have working spreadsheets where our student assistants update what items they're working on and what process they're in the middle of. Those sheets eventually turn into our manifest, which have metadata for every item. the item identifier for each one, and when we're finished, we include the handle from DSpace so that these items are easy to find on our end. You need to obsess about buying the right scanner, but for a project as easy as theses and dissertations, almost any scanner will do. Some are expensive, some are faster, and some are more versatile. Sampling of book scanners available right now. My personal favorite is the second from the right. It's a copybook, and because it's a planetary scanner, it can do books, sheets of paper, and been super helpful with fold-outs. These are not bad options. Remember, if you have a book cradle, it will mean that it's harder to scan other types of things like flat papers. If I had to do my process and my project over again, I'd get a couple of those $300 to $600 flatbeds and build my workflow around that. While the other scanners have cameras, and that complicates things quite a bit. You need to set up the camera, calibrate it, and while a scanner only needs mild setup. Also, the other three scanners have light sensitivity options, while a flatbed scanner provides its own light. All around, the book flatbed is less complicated. With printed on just one side, as theses and dissertations usually are, it's not difficult to scan a book by hand. Yes, the flatbed is probably slower, but you can buy more of them to make up for it. Just because a project is important doesn't mean the equipment has to be expensive. A perfect scanner for your situation is one that matches these 5 requirements. It needs to have sufficient quality of your needs, be in the right price range. There needs to be able to handle the items you have physically. Check the dimensions of the scannable area and compare that to your project. It needs to fit what you have available and be able to facilitate the time frame that you have for the project. Additionally, you should pay attention to the following. Image quality, usually identified as resolution or DPI, how reliable the equipment is, how the machine performs in real-world conditions, not just a demo. What functions does the scanner have, and at what cost? If you're getting something more than a flatbed, I suggest try to see the equipment in person, preferably at a place where it's currently in production. If you see it in person, check to see how much human intervention the scanning takes. A lot of automatic book scanners are not as automatic as they seem. How many parts does it have? The more moving parts, the more chance they will break. Is the equipment easy to move once it's installed? Does it take to finish 5 example items? And what limitations of the equipment? For example, can it not inch the whole surface area? If you see the equipment in person, then I suggest you call someone or email someone who has working experience with it. I've had a number of people contact me about equipment, and these are the questions that they ask me that I think give a great overview of whether or not a piece of equipment will work for you. To find out who has a scanner you are interested in, you can either ask the vendor for suggestions, and they will always give you good suggestions, people who will say that the equipment is great, or you can contact schools that you know are scanning and see if equipment or if they know anyone who uses it. All equipment has a life cycle. Don't go into a purchase expecting the equipment to last a decade. 5 years is really impressive for a piece of equipment being used daily for thousands of images. Ask the vendor of the expected life cycle of the equipment. Sometimes manufacturers stop supporting equipment to make a scanner obsolete. Sometimes they'll extend the warranty slightly. Vendors will usually have a really good sense for how long equipment will last. With all scanners, it's important to keep up with the cleaning schedule provided by the vendor. Even a flatbed will need to have its glass surface cleaned at some regular interval. Some scanners have special films on the glass that need specialized cleaners. It's good to know that ahead of time. Some scanners require the company to come visit and work on the equipment occasionally. Find out how often that needs to happen. And if you have access to a camera and someone who's mechanically inclined, you can set up a DIY scanner. There are a number of designs online. The main of the scanner is to keep the book flat, have even lighting, and allow a camera to image the page. With the right camera and the right setup, there's no difference in the end product from one of these scanners than a more expensive scanner, if you are looking at cropped and color-edited images. If you are writing the theses and dissertations, consider you might not even need a special scanner, or get a special sheet feeder. You can use a copier with a batch scanning option. And about cameras versus scanners. Cameras are popular for book scanning since they can image very quickly. Most of the dedicated book scanners have cameras. However, DPI doesn't work the same with a camera the way it works for a scanner. To find DPI for a camera image, you have to do some tests to figure out how many dots per inch they're going to be. Also, cameras are more finicky, needing to be focused and color calibrated more often. flatbed scanner is typically a scanning bar that slowly goes across the image. This can limit the scanning time a bit. When you're looking at equipment, be sure to check how long it takes for one image. But looked is the other equipment needs for digital projects. If you have to process a lot of images, you will need a computer with a lot of RAM. You will need monitors that are big enough to work with. You will need to set up storage space for the files while they're being worked on and when they're finished. You'll need lights, target cards, and just cleaning supplies to keep the scanners in the area clean. They're dustier than you think they are. Project planning is, for me, as important as the scanner or the metadata is to a project. As some theses and dissertation projects can be, the right project plan, the right workflow can make a big difference. Planning is really just estimating a project, coming up with a decent workflow, and watching your plan fall apart. To illustrate this, I'm going to give you a quick example. We set forth to scan 14,000 theses and dissertations in 5 years. We got a quote to outsource it. For 14 items, it was $1 million. I think that included shipping to New York. We didn't do it for less. Or more like, if we were going to spend $1 million on a project, then we're going to get a lot more press out of it and hire a lot more people locally. For outsourcing it, we hired a lot of student assistants and bought some really expensive automated high-speed scanners. We have 40 total student assistants working in the lab, comes up to about 12 people per hour, and we gave them a very flexible work schedule and some cash while they earned their degrees. So when I talk about money here, I'm not necessarily saying it's all bad, that it costs so much. There was a lot of good that came out of the money locally that wouldn't have come about if we had outsourced it. And this project was successful. We finished pretty much on schedule and almost under budget, kind of under budget. However, I learned a lot what not to do. The project ended up costing us $1.5 million. This is what opened my eyes to the importance of planning. We actually ended up spending more than what it would have cost us to get it outsourced. Why is this? Well, because starting out, we didn't consider things like the expensive yearly warranties for that expensive equipment. We didn't consider the cost of software that we were releasing. We didn't consider the full cost of human resources. Our had a site license for Photoshop, but we were spending extra to lease software that worked specifically with the scanners. At first, we didn't consider the importance of workflow for such a large project. Important when planning a project is to try to define your scope, or what will you do, how long do you think it should take, and sources you have to do it. The answer to these questions will inform what equipment you buy, how many people you hire, and other choices. You do differently if the project needs to be finished in 1 year than if you have 5, or have the budget for 1 person compared to 6. Try to decide which one of these is the most constrained. If you want a project good, fast, and cheap, you'll only be able to pick 2 of those and sometimes pick 1. This is especially true for digitization projects. Editors always want good, fast, and cheap. It's important to make sure you are clear about what is possible and what isn't. The other I realized was that workflow design was as important as everything else. Our 14,000 item project was actually a 4 million image project. It turns out with a project with that images, shaving a few seconds off of processing time made a huge difference in how fast the whole project would get done. Our increases in speed happened once we started looking at time per image and reducing hands-on time. So generally, you want to group similar items together. This is usually easy for theses and dissertations, but if you have odd ones, try to group the odd ones together. Try to simple processes. Try to pair passive tasks like OCR and image batching with active tasks like metadata or even scanning. Pay attention to total time to completion and shave that time down. Pay attention to backlogs because they may reveal workflow problems. For big projects, small changes have a big impact. Always keep documentation about what you're doing. It helps with training, and it helps if people come back to you and ask you what you did. While you're a project, you should continuously experiment. As you go through the process, try to do time studies. Pay attention to the total time in process per item, average process time for a single item, and average process time per image. To get all of these down to their minimum, and recalculate your costs and finish date based on the new times. So the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. That saying is true for digitization projects. The time was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Example, without even having to have the equipment, by using your phone, a flatbed, or a copier. I suggest after today, you go and scan 1 thesis or dissertation. take time to mess up, figure out a file organization that works, get experience cropping the images, even if it's just an MS Paint. If you have Photoshop, use that. If not, download GIMP to get the text as close to black and white as possible. Try out a metadata schema. If you have a content management system, upload it. I absolutely learn a lot more by trying digitizing one full thesis or dissertation than anything else. Even if you eventually outsource, you'll have a good idea of what you want if you try that yourself first. So to help, I have created this calculator to help you calculate the total cost of a project based on how much you can get done. The purpose of the calculator is to help everyone take human resources and time into consideration. It helps you not focus so much on just the equipment, and it's a tool to help estimate what you might need. So with that bit.ly link, the calculator will be in view only. You will have to make a copy of it for yourself. You'll be able to edit it once you have your own copy. Something not in this calculator are storage costs, because they can vary so much. Depending on scanners and the number of computers, you'll find that there's a perfect time period and setup that if you go faster or slower, it will cost you more. If your administration is focused on the equipment, I included on the right a calculator to help you extrapolate costs for the rest of the work. I included a calculator that's based on total investment and breaks down the other costs. This calculator is not perfect, but a decent tool to help you control expectations and figure out what you might need. I'll put any ongoing costs into this calculator. It makes every project cheaper to do in 1 year and then deleted right after, because that's the cheapest way to do it. It's a good point to talk about this. The cost for a digital project is not just the active project, but ongoing storage, organization, and maintenance of the items afterwards. This should be addressed in the budget somehow. A thought I had was to start an endowment to help pay for ongoing costs. In an ETD fee, we would ask for an investment in the future of their particular item. This hasn't materialized yet, but we're still thinking about this as an option for the future. I've gone through the calculator and come up with a few illustrative examples. I broke it down to 1,000 books, 10,000 books, and 50,000 books to give you a sense of scale. So for 1,000 books, it's a small shop, just one part-time worker with one scanner and one computer. Typically scan for an hour and process and do metadata for an hour, so one book every 2 hours. And it costs about $17,000 in 2 years. That's not bad at all. For 2 books, we step up to 2 scanners and a total of 4 people per hour. One of those people being metadata and batching, and one being a manager. In the calculator, for every 10 people you have in the process, it suggests a manager. To put this project into perspective, doing this alone would take about 20 years. The sweet spot for 50,000 books is about 4 scanners, that's 6 years of work and a little over $500,000. Keep in mind, when we were quoted outsourcing scanning, it was $1 million for 14,000 books. This is a really good example of what you can do with in-house scanning with the right setup, the right project plan, the right people. If you do the project in less than 3 years, you'd need 9 scanners, 2 managers, and $630,000. Just to put this project in perspective, one person doing this project would take 100 years. So using this calculator, I edited the cost per scanner and the books per hour, so you can see I've redone my old project with the high-speed book scanners. It turns out I would have only needed 4 students, and we would have finished around 2 years. It would have cost us less than outsourcing. In reality, I had 12 students an hour, and it turns out I only needed 4. That was much less of a headache for me and much less of a cost for the organization. However, I could have all done that project with 2 flatbed scanners. The project taken 3.5 years, which is not that big of a deal, but look at that price tag. For the amount of money we spent on one high-speed automatic scanner, we could have finished the whole project. That's food for thought. Before we move on, you can hire dedicated staff to working on this, but for most organizations, I'm going to guess you're going to hire temporary workers. I have some advice. The work is immensely boring. Try to find people who are quiet, people who love listening to music. One of the baddest things I ever saw was a gregarious student being force scanned for hours at a time. He nearly went mad and he quit soon after. He would have been better suited sitting at a circulation desk, not alone in a room scanning. You also hire detail-oriented people without people who are obsessed with perfection. I used to hire graduate students because they picked up on the skills quick, enjoyed the flexible schedule, and they would leave. For my process, it worked perfectly. And that people will quit. If you are used student assistants, just assume that every semester you will have turnover. You need to hire early. And mind that the more people you have working, the more time it will take you to train and organize their work. So talking to administration kind of changes depending on where the communication is coming from. Administrator is interested in digitization, then you would handle it differently than if you're trying to propose that you do an in-house digitization project. If your goal is to try to convince an administrator that you want to do in-house digitization, focus on the benefits it has for the local workforce, or the fact that you will retain control of the items. But don't the cons of in-house digitization. An administrator needs to be aware of both the positives and the negatives. An outsourcing company, you have a single price tag and a deadline. If things don't go well, you have a contract to protect you. If it go wrong locally, you're on the hook for it, which is how our project ballooned to a $1.5 million project when it could have been much less. If the trader wants you to scan, your job is also to manage expectations. It will cost time and human resources. There's no way around this. Make sure you give a reasonable schedule, make sure to define the stopping point for the project, make administrators aware of the level of skills you have locally, and make sure they understand that they will need to dedicate people to the project and not just add it to other tasks as assigned. I recommend that you use my calculator and then add 20% in both time and money. This is what's called management reserve, and it's your wiggle room. Things will go wrong, and there will be unexpected costs. So I'm available for phone consultations, and I will respond to email. So after this presentation, you are still interested in doing an in-house digitization project, I can help work through options, image processing, and I have experience with a few different kinds of equipment if you want to ask me about any. I also have access to a lot of people here at Texas Tech who do digitization locally if you need specialized help with something. That's all I have.
Boy, that was great. So I'd like to ask at this time, if you have any questions, please go ahead and enter them into the Q&A box. And do make sure the setting is to all panelists. And so people are typing in some questions. I'll ask you one, Joy. I'm said, there'll be some pushback against trying to spine off of old ETD or old theses and dissertations, and I'm wondering, if anyone at Texas Tech was like, "Oh no, you can't destroy those old books," and how you kind of handled that.
We did not cut any of our books because people had such a problem with the idea of cutting them. So a lot of money that we spent buying these fancy scanners was to calm people down about, we're not going to destroy these items. But I've seen other digitization shops use, cutting the spine and sending it through sheet feeder and getting more stuff done. And ultimately, it ends up being the same, end product, So I'm like, if you do a good enough job digitization, do you really need the physical item up in stacks? Copies of the item, sometimes like cut a spine and scanning it might be a great way to go, at least for 80% of the items.
Okay. Yeah, that actually was another question there. So hopefully I answered your question. Please feel free to type in a follow-up. The question is, where do you insert copyright-related needs into your workflow?
You need to deal with copyright at the very beginning if you're going to. I think we were doing digitization in 2007. There were camps of people, either you scan it, put it up, and, if people have a problem with it, take it down. And then there were camps that had to go get approval first. And that's probably the safer method to do, is getting approval first. But it's really hard to track people down. And so we were lucky that at the end of our theses and dissertations, there was a little piece of paper that said, I grant the Tech Library Dean to make my thing public. People who said yes on that, we definitely scanned those, and the people who said no, we didn't put those up. Now, when an author has a problem with copyright where they didn't do their part, you're going to have to deal with those as you get contacted by lawyers.
Where that is in the workflow, does that come? Can you talk a little bit more about where in the process you have that?
Which part? These are the
Permissions form.
The permissions form. Actually, our thesis and dissertations had the permission form published with them.
I see. Okay.
Some of them didn't have them, and we went ahead and put those up because the others didn't have them. But by and large, they gave us permission to make them available. And when we put our theses and dissertations up, I think I had maybe a dozen or maybe a dozen people who contacted us immediately and said, why do you have this up? Please take it down. And we did. And since they haven't had anyone request it, and we haven't had any problems.
Okay. And for the items that you didn't have permission for, did you scan those?
We did scan them, and we saved them. So they're on the same archive, dark archive, as our submitted electronic theses and dissertations. And there's a note in the record that says, we typically should have a stub record that says have the item, but it's not available.
I mentioned a Cornell website with training resources, and this questioner would like to know what that was.
Is a moving theory into practice digital tutorial. And so while I'm talking about the practical aspects of maybe moving a project through a process, they talk about more of the technical aspects. So they have things on digital imaging and like DI and how to deal with resolution and what kinds of color options there are. So it's a great supplement to anything I've talked about here. And it's free.
Okay. The question is, this library has started digitizing from microfilm, but the quality is dreadful for the older ones with backgrounds and so on. So they're currently planning on accepting the image much as it is so they can get more done. The question is it hard to let go of the desire for higher quality instead of usable? And to know what your thoughts are on that.
For me, that choice was never hard, but for a lot of the people who were here, that was that they really just wanted everything to look like it was born digital. So they wanted to see those clean edges and tried to make an argument that basically, as long as it's readable, that's all students care about. Or the readers, when they're reading it, they just want to be able to read. I've made an argument that our document delivery service occasionally has, art that they scan that has edges that are dark and whatever. And I'm like, does anyone complain about that? So my stance is it's better to get it up fast and make it readable than it is to pay attention to how beautiful it looks. But that's a constant struggle with student assistants and with people. It's just they have this instinctive desire to want to make it beautiful.
The next question is, how do you handle preservation?
We could do an entire presentation on that, but basically we have our archive in 3 different places. We keep the PDF of the file. We used to keep a lot more, but we've decided that the PDF is really the, for the EPDs that we have that have been submitted, all I have is the PDF. And so we did the PDF was good enough for preservation of these items. Let's see. If y'all have questions about digital preservation, Katie Winkler is actually our contact person for that, so she'd have much more information to say about it. But we don't let our DSpace instance or our Vireo instance stand in as a digital preservation mechanism. We go ahead and we have our local system set up.
Questions? I was wondering how you test the quality of OCR.
So what I do is just copy you can export an PDF as text and just look at it. It's funny, like well printed pages, will get most of the items correct, and you'll be surprised at how good the OCR is. But if you turn the page slightly, or if there's shadow, it just falls completely apart. If there's any kind of weird, then it will not pick up that notation. Things like if there's a splotch on the paper, it'll assume that's an eye. So, not pretty. And in fact, when you create a PDF and you do OCR, there was a choice for our equipment of, do you want to put the text that you OCR'd first and then behind it, or the image first and text behind it? And we figured out really quick that we wanted to do the text behind the image because it just looked terrible.
To clean up microform copies so that ETDs are more readable?
Yes. So the thing that matters for OCR is mostly contrast. If you can make a good contrast between the characters and the background, that will help. Microfilm has a lot of shading. Just find ways of minimizing the shading. Now, there's a lot of tricks that you can do in Photoshop to do that. I'm not going to go through that here about that, but there are ways of doing it, but it will take more time in processing.
Any questions? I do another one. Have you gotten any feedback from these dissertation authors over time as they, seen their work being posted?
Yeah, actually, most of the time we get like people are excited. They're like, I can't believe you put my item up. And I had a personal experience where my family found out that his grandmother's thesis was online. They all got very excited.
Wow.
I got to tell them, well, I'm responsible for this. Mostly people want to see their stuff up. We have had a couple of times where we had authors contact us, and him and I have been they really want them down. And sometimes the graduate school thinks that it's because they plagiarized, but we cannot prove that. But the way that they act, they think that might be in some way part of it, because digitizing the stuff and putting it up does open things up a little bit for more discovery, and that can reveal plagiarization.
Mm-hmm. In
fact, a thesis that we found had 6 pages that someone had just scanned from a book and put into their thesis.
Well, yeah, so that actually brings to another question, do you even consider the existence of potentially copyrighted material in ETDs as you're scanning them?
We try to assume the author did their due diligence, and we have a stance that if any request that there's a problem, we'll temporarily take the item down and investigate it. So we immediately take it down, and in fact, we have a way of taking it off of Google so it won't show up there. So we take it down, we investigate it, we figure out what the issue is. We put the item back up with the problem redacted, or we embargo the thesis, and we have a note about why. Trickle in throughout the years, where I think one summer we had 6. There was literally a company in Austin just sitting there going through everything and calling out everything.
Mm. Any questions? Well, that was fantastic. We really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much. Before everyone goes, I do want to say that we'll be sending out a link for a survey, so please do take the time to fill it out. We really would appreciate it. So if you're interested in presenting a webinar with Texida about an aspect of theses and dissertations, box for that in the survey, so please do let us know. We're especially interested in the grad school perspective, so if you're someone in your graduate college has an idea, pass that along in the survey. So then to Joy, thanks to Billy Peterson Lugo for the support on the webinar today, and thanks to all of the members of Texida for putting this together. And we will keep all of you in the loop as far as any future presentations. We don't have any scheduled at this time, but it's our intention to continue on with this. The presentation will be available. We'll be sending you out a link to view it within the next few days. So again, Joy,